Welcome to True Echo, where real stories of injustice, resilience, and redemption are brought to life. Here, silence is broken, respect is reclaimed, and one voice can shake an entire system. In today's story, you'll witness what happens when a powerful black CEO is treated like she doesn't belong, until the truth walks through the door and turns the entire bank upside down. Under the burning sun of a Houston summer, the sidewalk shimmered like glass. The heat rolled off the pavement in waves, and the tall steel and glass towers of the financial district cast long shadows over the bustling streets. It was just past 10:30 a.m. when Vivian Carter stepped out of her car, her heels striking the concrete with poise and purpose. She wore a tailored caramel suit, subtle yet commanding, and her curls were pinned back with a deliberate elegance. Her presence turned heads, not because she was loud, but because she was unmistakably self-assured. Vivian Carter was the founder and CEO of Carter Strategies, one of the most respected financial consulting firms in the southern U.S., a woman who turned a modest neighborhood business into a national brand. But no matter how far she'd climbed, there were still doors that refused to open unless she pushed hard. Today, she had an appointment at 11 a.m. with Highland Crest Bank's Houston branch manager, Marcus Kramer. It was to discuss a substantial loan for Carter Strategies' upcoming expansion. Everything was in place, documents pre-approved, references stellar, credit flawless. The only thing left was the final meeting. As Vivian stepped into the bank's lobby, a blast of cool air wrapped around her. The interior radiated restrained luxury, polished marble floors, crystal chandeliers glinting above, leather benches, and an aroma of fresh espresso and floral polish. Behind the reception desk sat a young blonde woman with a practiced smile, Melissa Stone. Her expression didn't falter as Vivian approached, but her eyes flicked from Vivian's hair to her heels to her designer handbag in a glance that said more than words ever could. "Yes?" Melissa asked, her tone polite but hollow. "I'm Vivian Carter. I have an 11 o'clock appointment with Mr. Marcus Kramer." Melissa tapped a few keys on her monitor, then nodded. "Yes, you're on the list. Please take a seat. He'll see you shortly." No water was offered. No genuine welcome. Just a vague gesture toward a row of empty seats beneath the soft hum of pendant lighting. Vivian didn't flinch. She'd seen this before, too many times. She walked to the window, where the sunlight pooled on the tiles, and sat with her back straight, her eyes alert. Minutes ticked by. The bank buzzed with quiet efficiency. Vivian watched as others came in, well-dressed, predominantly white clients, greeted with warmth, ushered in with smiles, their appointments expedited or waived altogether. One older man with a silver watch was led into the back within 2 minutes. A woman in designer heels was recognized by name and didn't even check in. Meanwhile, Melissa remained stoic, never once looking Vivian's way again. By 11:30, Vivian still hadn't been called. She shifted in her seat, checked her phone, but there was no message from the bank, no update. At 11:45, she stood and walked back to the desk. "Excuse me," she said calmly. "Can you confirm Mr. Kramer is aware I'm still waiting?" Melissa didn't look up. "He's in a meeting. It shouldn't be long." "No estimate?" Vivian asked. "I'm not sure." Vivian returned to her seat, each step heavier than the last. She told herself she was used to this. She'd dealt with the stares, the subtle barriers, the way systems said one thing and did another. But even so, her heart clenched. It wasn't the delay, it was the quiet message behind it: "You don't belong here." The minutes crawled. Noon came and went. The sunlight outside had shifted, casting long golden lines across the floor. Vivian remained alone, the only client still waiting. The conversations grew quieter. Laughter floated from offices she wasn't invited into. The air in the lobby, once cool and refreshing, now felt sterile and oppressive. At 12:05, a woman entered, golden hair, navy velvet dress, cream Chanel purse. Melissa stood instantly. "Good morning, Mrs. Lancaster," she said with a warmth she'd never shown Vivian. Within seconds, a staffer emerged from the hallway. "The boardroom is ready, Mrs. Lancaster." No one asked if she had an appointment. Vivian's chest tightened. It wasn't just favoritism, it was systemic. A quiet choreography of bias. She looked down at her hands, clenched tight in her lap, then lifted her head with resolve. She wasn't going to stay invisible. As the clock neared 12:30, the lobby emptied. Vivian stood and walked, not to the desk, not for permission, but toward the frosted glass doors that led to the manager's offices. The receptionist called after her. "Ma'am, you can't." Vivian kept walking. Her heels clicked against the marble. Each step was an act of defiance. She wasn't here for a favor. She was here because she earned the right to be. At the end of the hallway, she paused in front of a gleaming brass nameplate, Marcus Kramer. She knocked once and stepped inside. Marcus looked up, startled. Mid-50s, salt and pepper hair, tailored navy suit. His expression flickered, first confusion, then irritation. "Miss Carter, you weren't called." "No," she replied. "I've been waiting for over an hour and a half." He opened his mouth to object, then stopped. Vivian didn't flinch. "I had an 11 o'clock appointment. I confirmed it. And I watched 5 other clients, some without appointments, walk past me while I Saturday." The room went quiet. Vivian didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her presence alone filled every corner of that office. Finally, Marcus gestured toward a seat. "Please. Sit." Vivian took the chair, set her briefcase on the desk, and folded her hands calmly. This meeting wasn't just about a loan anymore. It was about justice. And she had no intention of being dismissed again. Vivian Carter sat across from Marcus Kramer, her hands resting firmly on her leather briefcase. The calm in her expression betrayed nothing of the fire beneath. Her silence wasn't compliance, it was a demand. One that forced Marcus, a man used to being in control, to shift uncomfortably in his chair. He cleared his throat, glancing at the clock as if to excuse himself with time. "Miss Carter, I apologize for the wait. My day has been unusually full, several high-priority clients, overlapping schedules." Vivian didn't blink. "I am a high-priority client." Her voice was even, but the weight behind her words was undeniable. She didn't flinch, didn't offer a smile to soften her message. Marcus seemed momentarily stunned, unsure whether to deflect or recover. He flipped through a file, her file, pretending to consult data he'd already ignored for hours. "I see your application here. Your firm, Carter Strategies, has an impressive track record. Strong financials. Expansion plans are ambitious, but feasible." Vivian leaned forward slightly, her eyes locked on his. "This loan isn't a risk for you. And you know it. What I want to know is why I was made to wait over an hour and a half, while clients who looked very different from me walked in and out without so much as a check-in." Marcus bristled. "I assure you, we don't operate on personal factors here. Everything is driven by client profiles, credit standing, financial." "Don't," Vivian interrupted, her voice firm. "Don't hide behind policy. I was judged the moment I walked in. Not for my numbers. Not for my credentials. But for who I am. Or more precisely, what I'm not." The room went still. Marcus looked at her, finally seeing what he hadn't wanted to, a woman who had built an empire while being doubted at every step. A woman whose voice couldn't be ignored, not anymore. "There's a difference," she said, "between being forgotten, and being excluded. I wasn't overlooked. I was filtered out." Marcus exhaled, trying to find footing. I understand how you feel." "No," she said, "you don't. And you won't unless you listen." She sat back, giving him space to react, to think, to face the truth. And he did, for a moment. His eyes dropped to the papers again. But the veneer was cracking. I've worked in finance for 22 years, she continued. I've consulted for corporations that could buy this bank twice over. I've sat in rooms with Fortune 500 CEOs. I've presented at global summits. But today, I was treated like a nuisance. Like someone you hoped would just give up and walk away. A flicker of regret crossed his face, but it didn't matter. The damage had been done. Vivian opened her briefcase and slid her documents across the desk. Here's what you've missed. 5-year projections. A liquidity plan. Assets and capital. I've met every metric. The only variable today was you. Marcus's jaw tightened. He knew she was right, but couldn't admit it without implicating himself and the entire culture of his branch. Before he could respond, a knock sounded at the door. It creaked open, and in walked 3 men in suits. Polished. Executive. Powerful. Vivian turned, and the man in front, mid-60s, sharp-featured, charismatic, broke into a wide smile the moment he saw her. Vivian Carter, he exclaimed. What a surprise. Richard Langford. CEO of Highland Crest Bank. Vivian stood. Richard. I wasn't expecting you. Neither was I, he chuckled. We're doing a surprise visit of key branches. I had no idea you'd be here today. He extended his hand, and Vivian shook it, her poise unwavering. Richard turned to Marcus. Marcus, you've met Vivian before, right? She was instrumental in our digital transformation last year. Marcus's face lost color. Yes, sir, we were just reviewing her application. Richard narrowed his eyes. Application? Vivian turned back to him. I had an appointment at 11. I've been waiting ever since. Richard's jaw set. He turned to Marcus, who was already sweating. She's been waiting over an hour and a half. Richard asked, voice sharpening. Marcus stammered. There were unexpected delays. Richard raised a hand. Enough. Miss Carter is one of our top strategic minds. She's not just a client. She's an asset to this institution. The air in the room shifted. The power dynamics reversed. Marcus looked like a man suddenly standing on sand. I'd like a full review of what happened today, Richard said coldly. And Vivian, would you join us for a few minutes in the boardroom? I'd like to hear your side. Vivian nodded. Not because she needed validation, but because her voice was about to reach the very top. As she followed Richard down the corridor, leaving Marcus behind, she didn't just feel seen. She felt unstoppable. Vivian walked alongside Richard Langford, flanked by 2 silent board members whose presence alone could turn a branch manager's career to dust. The hallway's soft lighting cast long shadows on the gray carpet as the group moved with quiet authority. It was a walk she had taken before, but never like this. Never from the lobby of invisibility to the inner sanctum of reckoning. The boardroom was a modern fortress, glass walls, sleek walnut paneling, an oval table surrounded by high-backed leather chairs. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the Houston skyline, but the view inside was sharper. Vivian took her seat without hesitation. She was no longer a visitor. Richard sat across from her. The board members remained standing, their eyes steady on both Vivian and their CEO. A quiet settled over the room, not discomfort, but anticipation. I want to understand what happened today, Richard said. From the moment you walked in. Vivian nodded, folding her hands. She began with Melissa Stone, the blank gaze, the hollow tone, the way she was told to sit and wait with no offer of refreshment, no warmth. She explained how others, white men in tailored suits, women with platinum handbags, were greeted with effortless courtesy and ushered past her. I kept track, Vivian said flatly. At least 5 clients arrived after me. None had appointments. All were escorted back within minutes. She described the moment she realized she was being filtered out. How Mrs. Lancaster, the blonde woman with a Chanel bag, walked in and was swept straight into the VIP corridor, bypassing every protocol. No ID. No check-in. Just a smile and open doors. The board members exchanged glances. Richard's expression darkened. I sat there until I knew I couldn't sit anymore, Vivian continued. When I finally asked for an update, Melissa told me Mr. Kramer was in a meeting. But when I walked to his office, I found him alone. He wasn't busy. He just didn't want to see me. Richard tapped a pen against the table. So you walked in? I did. Because I deserved to. The bluntness in her tone landed like a gavel. This wasn't a grievance. It was a verdict. I've dealt with subtle discrimination before, she said. The kind that hides behind manners and policy. But what happened today was deliberate exclusion dressed as procedure. It's not about whether Marcus likes me. It's about a system that encourages people like him to decide, in silence, who deserves to be seen. Richard leaned back, his hands clasped tightly. He said nothing, but his gaze was fierce. One board member finally spoke. Have you experienced this at any other Highland Crest branches? Vivian paused. Yes. But never this blatant. The man nodded grimly. Another board member added, this isn't just about one person, then. It's cultural. Richard let out a long, slow breath. I've built this bank on principles of transparency and trust, he said. But those mean nothing if the face we show to people like you, especially someone with your record, is indifference. He turned to his colleagues. I want a full audit of the Houston branch. Starting today. Front desk procedures, client prioritization, internal communications, everything. One board member immediately opened his tablet and began typing. Then Richard looked back at Vivian. Your loan will be approved today, he said. But more than that, I want to apologize. Personally. This branch failed you. I failed you. And I promise this won't be buried. Vivian met his eyes. She didn't smile. Not yet. An apology is a start, she said. But what I want is change. Not just for me, but for the next person who walks through those doors looking like me. I don't want them to need a CEO in the room to be treated with basic respect. Richard nodded solemnly. Understood. Silence followed. Not awkward, but full. Vivian stood slowly. I appreciate your time. But I think I've waited long enough today. Richard rose as well. We'll be in touch with updates. You have my word. As she turned to leave the boardroom, the door opened. A junior staffer entered with her file in hand, thick with reports, projections, and documentation that should have spoken for itself. Vivian didn't need to look at it. Her voice had spoken louder. Outside the boardroom, the hallway felt different. The walls weren't thicker or thinner. But the air had shifted. It no longer pressed down on her. Melissa Stone at reception looked up as Vivian approached. Her posture was rigid. Her hands trembled slightly on the keyboard. Their eyes met, briefly, and then Melissa looked away. Vivian said nothing. She didn't need to. Some silences speak louder than any confrontation. As the glass doors slid open and the Texas sun met her face, Vivian Carter knew something irreversible had happened. She hadn't just reclaimed her dignity. She had rattled the walls of an institution. The moment Vivian stepped back into the heat of the Houston afternoon, the sunlight felt different, not just warm, but righteous, like it had been waiting for her. The sting of the morning still clung to her skin, but it no longer defined her mood. It was behind her now, burned into memory but powerless to shame her. She took a few deliberate steps and stopped, turning to glance back at the glass facade of Highland Crest Bank. The walls reflected the sky and the towering skyline around them, looking as pristine and impenetrable as ever. But Vivian knew better. From the inside, those walls weren't made of glass, they were mirrors. And she had just forced them to look at themselves. As she pulled her car door open, her phone buzzed. Email from Highland Crest Bank. Subject, Loan Approval, Carter Strategies Expansion. Dear Ms. Carter. Thank you for your continued partnership with Highland Crest Bank. We are pleased to inform you that your application for the Carter Strategies Expansion Loan has been approved. You will receive formal documentation and next steps shortly. Please let us know if we can be of further service. It was the email she had waited hours for, and the confirmation she already knew was inevitable once the right people saw her. Vivian tapped her screen off and slipped the phone back into her handbag. The email wasn't victory. It was simply the result of removing the wrong gatekeeper from the path. She didn't go home. Not yet. Instead, she drove straight to her office in Midtown, where her executive assistant, Jordan, greeted her at the door with a puzzled look. Everything okay? He asked. You were supposed to be out of the meeting 2 hours ago. Vivian walked past him, unbuttoning her blazer. Let's just say it ran long for the wrong reasons. She sat down at her desk, flipping open her laptop. Her inbox was full, her Slack messages blinking, her team's questions stacking up like always. But she paused. There was something she needed to do first. Jordan, she said, I want you to draft a formal letter to Highland Crest's executive board. Thank them for their time, acknowledge the loan approval, but I want it to include something else. Jordan blinked. What's that? Vivian turned slowly in her chair to face him. A call for reform. I want them to know this wasn't just about one appointment gone wrong. This is about every subtle act of exclusion I've witnessed in banks like theirs across the country. I want to suggest they audit their branches, not just for efficiency, but for equity. Jordan's fingers hovered above his tablet. Are you sure you want to go that far? Vivian raised an eyebrow. Too far is letting it happen again. He nodded and began to type. Across town, Highland Crest's boardroom remained tense. Marcus Kramer had been told to wait outside. He stood stiffly near the elevators, sweat cooling on his back, each ding of the passing lift reminding him that his once unshakable authority was now a balancing act on a crumbling ledge. Inside, Richard Langford and the 2 board members reviewed Vivian's statements again, this time against internal logs and security footage. Time stamps. Guest logs. Reception reports. All of it confirmed her account. She had been dismissed, delayed, and disregarded. Worse yet, there was no documented reason. She arrived at 10:45, one board member murmured. Confirmed on camera. Sat down by 10:50. Wasn't acknowledged again until almost 12:20. Meanwhile, 5 guests arrived between 11 o'clock and noon and were escorted within 10 minutes. The other board member didn't look up. 3 of them had no appointments. Richard shook his head. This isn't a policy problem. This is a people problem. Marcus made a call, and Melissa reinforced it. He stood slowly and walked to the window, looking out over the city, deep in thought. You know what the worst part is? He said after a moment. Vivian didn't ask for special treatment. She asked for equal treatment. And we failed her. He turned back to them. I want Marcus suspended effective immediately, he said. Formal review pending. And Melissa Stone, transferred out of reception, reassigned to back office while we conduct training. The board members nodded, already scribbling notes. I'll be releasing an internal memo before close of business, Richard continued. We're initiating a full equity audit across all 26 branches. No delays. No exceptions. Understood. By 5 p.m., every regional director had received the news. The CEO was implementing sweeping changes in client-facing procedures. No one knew the full story yet, but whispers were already spreading. Something had happened at the Houston branch, and it wasn't minor. Back in her office, Vivian stood at her window, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The golden light painted long shadows across her floor, just as it had across the bank lobby earlier that day. Her assistant walked in. "Email is sent. Letter to the board, CC to Richard Langford." "Good," Vivian said. "Now let's make sure we're ready for the rollout next week. If they think today was intense, wait until they see what we do with this loan." Jordan chuckled. "Turning fire into fuel. Got it." Vivian smiled faintly, but her mind lingered elsewhere. Not on profit projections. Not on the expansion. But on every young woman of color who might walk into a bank like Highland Crest, alone, credentials in hand, and be made to feel like she didn't belong. Maybe they wouldn't see her. But they'd feel her presence. Because from this day forward, Vivian Carter wasn't just building a business. She was building a legacy. The next morning arrived crisp and clear, Houston's skyline stretching out under a sharp blue sky. Vivian Carter stood in front of the Carter Strategies team, a small but tight-knit group of 25 employees, gathered in the conference room of their Midtown headquarters. The loan approval had just been announced company-wide, and a wave of applause had filled the room. But as the cheers died down, Vivian remained standing at the front, not to bask in victory, but to share something deeper. This expansion, she began, isn't just about growth. It's about presence. About claiming space in an industry that hasn't always made room for people like us. Yesterday reminded me why this matters. She paused, scanning the room. Every face was listening, intently. Some were young analysts straight out of school. Others were veterans who had followed Vivian through every pivot and battle over the last decade. And all of them, in one way or another, had felt the sting of being underestimated. I was made to wait. To be sidelined by people who didn't know who I was, and didn't care to find out. But I didn't wait quietly. And I didn't walk out. I walked through. Her voice hardened with purpose. From this point on, Carter Strategies isn't just going to help clients thrive. We're going to make sure no one has to sit in silence in any room they've rightfully earned. The team broke into applause again, this time more than celebratory, it was affirming. They didn't just believe in the mission. They were part of it. After the meeting, Jordan approached her as she sipped a coffee by the office window. "That was powerful," he said. Vivian gave a tight nod. "We're not just consultants anymore, Jordan. We're changemakers. And we need to act like it." He handed her a stack of documents. "I compiled data from the past 3 years. Clients we've helped who faced similar barriers, loan rejections, unfair interest rates, closed-door rejections with no justification. There's a pattern." Vivian flipped through the pages, her brow furrowing. "This isn't just anecdotal anymore. This is systemic." She looked up. "We're going to start an initiative. Call it the Access Project. A wing of Carter Strategies dedicated to helping marginalized entrepreneurs navigate these systems, and expose the ones keeping them out." Jordan blinked. "You're going public with this?" "Oh, I'm not just going public," she said. "I'm going loud." Later that day, an interview request came in from a well-known business publication. Word of the Highland Crest incident had leaked, not the full details, but enough. People were asking questions. Rumors of a high-profile confrontation were swirling. The editor's email read: "Sources say a major incident involving discrimination occurred at the Houston branch of Highland Crest Bank. We understand you were involved. Would you be open to sharing your experience?" Vivian hesitated for a moment. She hadn't planned on going media-facing yet. But something about the way that morning had felt, the applause, the fire in her team's eyes, told her it was time. She replied, "Let's talk. But not about what happened to me. Let's talk about what happens to all of us." The article dropped 3 days later. The headline was bold and unmissable. When power doesn't look like you, one CEO's stand against polite discrimination. Vivian's story wasn't told as a personal tragedy, it was a call to arms. It detailed the patterns of delay, deflection, and unspoken exclusion experienced by black professionals in finance. It quoted her directly. "I don't want apologies. I want accountability. I want transformation." The article exploded. LinkedIn lit up. Professionals from around the country shared their own stories in the comments: quiet indignities, denied appointments, unexplained rejections. Some had names. Others just had memories. But all had one thing in common: they'd been made to feel invisible. Within 48 hours, #The Access Project began trending. And inside Highland Crest's headquarters, the article sent shockwaves through the boardroom. Richard Langford read it 3 times in silence. It was clear now, Vivian hadn't just confronted the branch manager. She had confronted the institution. And the world was watching. "I want every branch audited," Richard said quietly to his chief operating officer. "I want independent observers. And I want a report on my desk within the month." The COO hesitated. "What about Marcus Kramer?" "Let HR finish their review," Richard said. "But if even half of what Vivian described checks out, he's done." That evening, Richard called Vivian. "I read your interview," he said. "Didn't hold back," she replied. "You didn't need to," he said. "You were right." A silence stretched between them, not awkward, but heavy with acknowledgement. "I'm ready to help," Richard added. "If you move forward with this access project, Highland Crest wants to partner." Vivian paused. "Then prove it," she said. "Make your first action public. Not reactive. Proactive." Richard didn't hesitate. "You'll have it by end of week." As she hung up, Vivian felt the satisfaction of something larger than a loan or a promotion. She had forced an institution to reckon with itself, and now, it wanted to help others do the same. By the end of the week, Highland Crest Bank made headlines of its own. A formal statement was released across major financial news outlets and their corporate website. Highland Crest Bank commits to equity audit and partnership with the Access Project. The press release confirmed the susp. Scion of Marcus Kramer, the reassignment of front desk staff, and a company-wide reform to retrain every customer-facing employee on inclusive practices. But the real headline was the announcement that Highland Crest would be the founding corporate sponsor of the Access Project, Vivian Carter's new initiative to support underrepresented entrepreneurs in gaining fair access to financial services. Vivian read the press release in her office, seated at her desk beneath a framed quote from her mother. "You don't wait for fairness. You build it." She smiled. Not because the battle was over, it wasn't. But because the next one had already begun, and this time, she was leading it. The Access Project launched with a roar. Within days, Vivian's team had established a website, announced a partnership with a nonprofit legal advisory group, and scheduled free workshops on financial literacy, loan application strategies, and institutional navigation. Clients from across the country, small business owners, community leaders, first-time entrepreneurs, began reaching out. Most came with stories of rejection not because of numbers, but names. Not because of plans, but appearances. Vivian scheduled an online panel titled, "The Doors We're Told Not to Push," a live virtual event featuring voices from across the finance and business world who had been quietly carrying the weight of exclusion for years. The event drew over 25,000 attendees. One panelist, a Latino restaurant owner from Arizona, shared his experience. "I walked into a bank with a 780 credit score and a decade of business history, and they told me I should get a cosigner. My white business partner walked in the next week without documents and got pre-approved in 20 minutes. Another, a black tech startup founder, recounted. "They smiled. They said all the right words. But when I left, I saw my application had been marked as high risk before they even read my proposal." Vivian didn't interrupt. She didn't need to. Her presence was a signal. A signal that someone who had once been made to wait, politely, coldly, endlessly, was now holding the microphone and passing it to others. But the pressure also mounted. Not everyone celebrated her rise. A few conservative pundits accused her of creating controversy to gain attention. Online trolls flooded her inbox with messages telling her to be grateful, to stop playing the race card, to take her loan and move on. Vivian didn't flinch. She'd built Carter strategies in the trenches, ignored in investor meetings, second-guessed in every boardroom, and asked more than once if she was the assistant at her own company. Every insult now just confirmed she'd touched a nerve. But inside Highland Crest, the real reckoning had only just begun. In an internal meeting, Richard Langford faced his senior management team. "Let's stop pretending this was an isolated error," he said. "Vivian Carter exposed a rot in how we greet clients. A rot we've tolerated because it was quiet, because it was polite." The room was tense. "We've prided ourselves on discretion and efficiency," Richard continued. "But what good is efficiency if it quietly excludes the very people we claim to serve?" The head of regional operations raised a hand. "Some branches are pushing back. They say this is overcorrection. That we're bowing to pressure." "Then let them push," Richard said. "Let them squirm. We're not bowing to pressure, we're rising to meet principle." Back in her office, Vivian received a hand-delivered envelope from Highland Crest. Inside, a single-page letter signed by Richard Langford. "Dear Vivian. Your voice not only reminded us of who we failed, but who we aspire to become. Change doesn't come from policy, it comes from people with courage. You've changed this institution forever. With deep respect. Richard Langford." She read the letter twice before placing it in a drawer. A gesture of closure. But she knew it wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of a different fight, not for herself, but for every would-be entrepreneur who'd grown used to hearing no without reason. For every woman told to wait. For every client who was always almost, but never quite, welcome. And then the call came. A national morning show wanted her on live television. Not just to talk about the Access project, but to tell her story. Her team hesitated. Jordan pulled her aside. "Viv, you don't owe them this. You don't need to make yourself a symbol." Vivian looked out the window. "I'm not doing it to be a symbol," she said. "I'm doing it so the next woman walking into that lobby doesn't wonder if she's crazy for feeling what she feels." She turned back. "And if telling my story helps her walk straighter, speak louder, or push through that door with her head high, then it's worth every word." The studio lights were harsh, the cameras cold, and the countdown sharp in her earpiece. Vivian Carter sat poised in the bright armchair across from the show's anchor, a woman known for her polished interviews with Fortune 500 leaders and public figures. Behind them, the screen flashed with the segment title. "Breaking the Glass Lobby, a CEO's Fight for Respect." Vivian's face remained composed, but her heart beat steadily, a controlled thunder beneath her tailored blazer. "We're here today," the anchor began, "with Vivian Carter, CEO of Carter Strategies, and now founder of the Access Project, an initiative rapidly gaining national momentum. Vivian, thank you for being here." Vivian nodded. "Thank you for having me. You've made headlines this past week, not because of a scandal, but because of a stand. You were made to wait at a bank you had an appointment with. A bank you've worked with before. What made you speak out publicly?" Vivian looked directly into the camera. "Because it wasn't just about me," she said. "It never is. What happened in that bank lobby wasn't a glitch, it was a feature. A quiet, systemic sorting that tells people, especially people who look like me, that we're not the priority. I refuse to let that pass as normal." The anchor leaned forward. "Some critics say this was just an unfortunate scheduling mistake. Others say you've politicized a simple inconvenience. What do you say to that?" Vivian didn't flinch. I say they've never sat in a room where they were smiled at but dismissed. Never walked in fully qualified, only to be overlooked for someone who fit a more comfortable profile. This isn't politics. This is people. This is the cost of subtle exclusion, dressed up as policy. The studio was silent. Vivian continued. The real danger is not overt racism. It's the invisible kind. The kind that wears a name badge and a smile. The kind that makes you wait while someone else walks through. And if we don't call it what it is, we give it permission to continue. By the end of the segment, #Vivian Carter was trending on social media. Clips from the interview went viral. One quote stood out the most, replayed thousands of times across TikTok and Instagram. Respect isn't about who's comfortable in the room. It's about who has the right to be there. And I've earned mine. That night, Vivian returned home to a flood of messages. A teenage girl from Detroit wrote. I saw your interview. I want to study finance one day. You made me believe there's a place for me. A woman from Atlanta shared. I used to bring my white business partner to all our bank meetings just so we'd be taken seriously. Thank you for making me feel seen. Even a junior banker from a Highland Crest branch, anonymous, but brave, sent a message. I used to think the way we sorted clients was just business. After your story, I'm rethinking everything. I'm sorry. And I want to do better. Vivian stared at the screen. The words weren't just gratitude, they were awakening. Meanwhile, inside Highland Crest, a storm had been weathered. But what emerged was something stronger. Richard Langford initiated mandatory bias training across every tier of management. The company quietly began recruiting for a new executive-level role, Chief Equity Officer. He sent Vivian a follow-up email. If you know someone for the role, I trust your judgment more than any consultant's. Vivian replied with a name that night. 2 weeks later, her nominee, a black woman with a decade of DEI leadership and a Harvard MBA, was hired. Not as a token gesture, but as a cornerstone in the bank's new foundation. Vivian never returned to that Houston branch, not because she avoided it, but because she didn't have to. Her shadow already lived there, echoing in every greeting, every shift in protocol, every manager who now paused before making a silent judgment. The lobby that once reduced her to a question mark had become a monument to her refusal to stay quiet. Months passed. Carter Strategies opened 2 new offices, Chicago and Atlanta. The Access Project received corporate sponsorships from 3 more financial institutions. It partnered with historically black colleges to provide financial literacy workshops and business mentorships for students of color. One day, after a conference, Vivian sat alone at a cafe when a young man approached her. He was maybe 25, dressed in a second-hand suit, nervous but determined. Miss Carter, he said. You don't know me. But I was in the Highland Crest lobby that day. I saw you sitting there. I was waiting too, but I didn't stay. Vivian turned slowly. I left after 20 minutes. I thought, maybe I wasn't good enough. Maybe I wasn't supposed to be there. His voice shook. But when I saw what you did, what you said, it changed something. I applied again. Got a small loan this time. I'm opening my second barbershop next month. Vivian smiled gently. That's why I spoke up. Thank you, he said, and walked away. Vivian took a slow breath. That's the thing about speaking the truth. It echoes, even when you leave the room. She looked out the window, the city alive with stories like hers, like his, like those still being written. And she knew the work wasn't over. But now, the doors were opening. Not all at once. But one voice at a time. End of story. Vivian Carter's story reminds us that real change doesn't always come with a protest sign or a microphone. Sometimes, it walks through the front door, waits with dignity, and refuses to leave quietly. It takes courage to speak up, not just for yourself, but for everyone who's ever been told to wait, to shrink, to come back another day. But if one voice can shake an institution, imagine what happens when we all rise. Respect isn't something you're given. It's something you claim, loudly, firmly, and without apology. If Vivian's story moved you, share your experience in the comments. Subscribe to True Echo for more powerful journeys of justice, dignity, and the people who dare to demand more. Because the truth always echoes.